Person standing at a window, rain outside, phone in hand, waiting there's someone you keep thinking about. Not because they're particularly kind to you. Not because things are easy with them, but because you never quite know where you stand. One day they're warm, present. They make you feel like the most interesting person in the room. And then they pull back. And something in you, something you can't fully explain, becomes completely consumed by the question of why. You tell yourself it's just chemistry, that you're attracted to them. That this is just how love feels when it's real. But somewhere underneath that story, there's a quieter voice that already knows the truth. This isn't love pulling you forward. This is something older than that. Something that was there long before this person ever entered your life. And today, we're going to look at exactly what that something is. Because understanding it, really understanding it, not just intellectually, but in a way that reaches the part of you that keeps repeating this pattern, that's the only thing that actually changes anything. Let's start with what this actually feels like from the inside. Because if you've lived this pattern, you know it has a very specific texture. It doesn't feel like a red flag. It never does in the beginning. It feels like electricity. It feels like this person is different, more complex, more interesting than everyone else who's ever liked you openly and easily. When they're present with you, really present, it feels extraordinary. And when they pull away, when the warmth disappears without explanation, when a message goes unanswered for 2 days and you find yourself reading the same conversation over and over looking for clues, you don't feel warned. You feel more attached. This is the first thing worth sitting with. The withdrawal doesn't create distance between you and this person. It closes it. You find yourself thinking about them more when they're unavailable than when they're right in front of you. You find yourself working harder to understand them, to reach them, to get back to that feeling of being fully received by them. And when they do come back, when the warmth returns, the relief is almost physical. Like something that was held tight in your chest finally releases. That moment of return feels like proof that it's real, proof that the connection is genuine, proof that all the uncertainty was worth it. And then the cycle begins again. Over time, this pattern does something to your sense of self. You start to build your emotional stability around their responses. A quick reply becomes a good day. Silence becomes evidence that something is wrong with you. You start editing yourself, monitoring what you say, calculating how much to share, how available to seem, how much enthusiasm is too much. You become a careful, strategic version of yourself in this relationship. And the painful irony is that the more you shape yourself around their unpredictability, the less they are actually relating to you, and the more isolated you become inside a connection that is supposed to be the opposite of isolation. You may have noticed this doesn't just happen with romantic interests. Maybe it shows up with a friend whose approval you can never quite secure. A parent whose warmth has always been unpredictable. A mentor who sometimes treats you as exceptional and other times seems not to notice you at all. The person changes. The feeling doesn't, because the pattern isn't about them. It never was. Here's what most people are told about this experience. They're told they have a type. They're told they're attracted to emotionally unavailable people. They're told to just choose differently. Choose someone stable. Choose someone kind. Choose someone who texts back. And so they try. They go on dates with the kind, consistent, openly interested person, and they feel nothing. Or worse, they feel a vague, uncomfortable boredom, a sense that something is missing. And then the guilt arrives because they know this person is good for them. They know this is what healthy looks like. And yet the pull simply isn't there. So they conclude that there's something wrong with them. That they don't deserve healthy love. That they're somehow wired for pain. That this is just who they are. But that conclusion is wrong. And it's worth sitting with why it's wrong, because the actual explanation is both more compassionate and more useful. You are not broken. You are not addicted to pain. You are not someone who unconsciously wants to suffer. What you are is someone whose nervous system learned a very specific lesson a long time ago. And it learned that lesson so thoroughly, so early, so deeply, that it coded it not as a belief but as a feeling, as instinct. And you cannot think your way out of instinct, not directly, not without understanding what the instinct is actually trying to do. Visual, child's hands reaching upward, adult hands out of frame. To understand what's happening in the brain during this pattern, we need to start with attachment. Not the pop psychology version, the actual mechanism. In the first years of life, your brain is doing something extraordinary. It is building a model of how relationships work. Specifically, it is learning, when I need connection, what happens? If the answer reliably is, someone comes, someone is warm, Someone is consistent. The brain builds a model of attachment that says connection is safe, available, and worth seeking. This is called secure attachment, and it produces adults who can tolerate intimacy without anxiety, who can hold space for both closeness and distance without their nervous system treating either as a crisis. But many people didn't grow up in that environment. Many people grew up with caregivers who were loving but inconsistent, not cruel, not absent in the obvious, dramatic way, just unpredictable. Warm one evening and distant the next. Present during the good days and emotionally unavailable during stress. Giving real affection sometimes and then retreating behind silence or criticism without explanation. And the child in that environment learns a different model. The model says connection is real, but it is not reliable. You have to earn it, you have to watch for it. You have to be ready to pursue it when it withdraws. And here's the crucial part. Because the caregiver is also the source of safety, the child cannot simply detach from the unpredictability. They cannot choose a more consistent person. So instead, the nervous system does something deeply intelligent. It codes the uncertainty itself as a feature of attachment. It learns, this is what love feels like. This reaching, this watching, this relief when the warmth returns, this is what connection is. Visual, abstract brain animation, neural pathways lighting up in an irregular pattern, and it stores that model. Not in the thinking mind. Not in the part of you that reads psychology articles and knows what secure attachment looks like, in the body. In the felt sense of what relationship feels like when it is real. This is why choosing the stable person with your conscious mind doesn't work. Your conscious mind knows they're good for you. But your nervous system doesn't recognize them as love. Because love, to your nervous system, has always had this particular texture. The texture of uncertainty, of pursuit, of earned return. Now let's go one layer deeper into the chemistry of this. Because there is a reason the uncertainty doesn't just feel tolerable, it feels compelling. It has to do with dopamine. Dopamine is commonly described as the pleasure chemical. But that's not quite accurate. Dopamine is the anticipation chemical. It fires not when you receive a reward, but when you expect one. And this is the part that explains everything. It fires most powerfully when the reward is unpredictable. This has been demonstrated in controlled experiments repeatedly. When a reward comes on a fixed schedule, every single time, reliably, the dopamine response is modest, stable. The brain notes the pattern and begins to take it for granted. But when the reward comes randomly, sometimes, not always, you never quite know when, the dopamine response is dramatically higher. The brain becomes more activated, more focused, more driven. This is the same mechanism that makes certain forms of gambling so difficult to stop. Not because every bet pays off, because you never know which one will. The unpredictability is not the problem the brain needs to escape. It is the fuel that keeps the brain engaged. Visual slot machine wheel. Then a simple metaphor. Someone waiting by a window that sometimes lights up and sometimes doesn't. Now apply this to an emotionally inconsistent relationship. When someone is warm to you sometimes and withdrawn other times, without clear pattern or reason, your dopamine system does not learn to tune them out. It learns to watch for them, to orient toward them, to remain in a state of low-level activation that is always in some corner of your awareness, waiting for the next sign. This is why you check your phone more with the person who texts inconsistently than with the one who always responds. This is why you find yourself thinking about them not when things are good, but especially when things are unclear. Your brain is not malfunctioning. It is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It is treating this relationship the way it was taught very early, very thoroughly, that important relationships work. And it is generating the neurochemical state that feels in your body, like being fully alive in the presence of someone who matters. So what do you actually do with this? Not the intellectual version of understanding it. You may already have that. But the embodied version. The version that slowly, gradually, rewires the felt sense of what safety and connection can feel like. Because that's what this is. It's not about making better choices with your thinking mind. It's about giving your nervous system new data. New experiences that slowly teach it that consistency is not boredom, that predictability is not the absence of feeling, that being fully seen by someone who doesn't withdraw afterward is not a lesser form of connection. Here is how that actually happens. Visual. Notebook with one sentence written. What does calm feel like? The first step is learning to identify the difference between excitement and safety in your body. Not conceptually, Physically. The next time you feel that pull, that particular electricity with someone who keeps you uncertain, pause for a moment before you follow it and ask, where do I feel this in my body? Most people find it lives in the chest or the throat, a kind of tightness, an aliveness that has an edge of anxiety in it. Now recall the last time you felt genuinely, quietly safe with another person. It doesn't have to be romantic. A friend you completely trust, a moment of real rest. Where does that live in your body? For most people, it's lower, more diffuse, softer. The reason this matters, your nervous system speaks in physical sensations before it speaks in thoughts. If you can learn to distinguish the felt sense of anxiety coded as excitement from the felt sense of actual safety, you give yourself a moment of choice that didn't exist before. Not to suppress the attraction, not to force yourself toward the stable person. Just to name, accurately, what is happening. This is anxiety, not chemistry. That naming alone interrupts the automatic. Visual, slow-moving light patterns on a wall. The second step is learning to tolerate the discomfort of consistency. When someone is straightforwardly kind to you, when they show up reliably, when their warmth doesn't require earning, notice the reaction in your nervous system. For many people with this pattern, it produces a subtle but real discomfort. A feeling of something being missing, of the relationship being too easy, of not quite trusting it. This reaction is not evidence that the connection is shallow. It is evidence that your nervous system is encountering something it doesn't have a template for. It doesn't recognize consistency as love, and so it generates unease in its presence. The practice here is simply to stay with the unease rather than act on it. Don't manufacture drama to make the relationship feel more real. Don't pull back to test their response. Just sit with the unfamiliarity and let it be unfamiliar rather than wrong. The nervous system learns from repeated experience that what it doesn't recognize as love can still be love, but only if you stay long enough to accumulate that experience. Visual. Two people sitting quietly in the same room, both reading, comfortable. The third step is examining the early template. This is the most important one and the one most people skip. Because the pattern we've been describing didn't come from nowhere. It came from a specific relational environment that your nervous system learned from. And at some point, not to assign blame, but to achieve clarity, it's worth asking, who was the first person whose warmth felt like this? Inconsistent. Sometimes extraordinary. Sometimes withdrawn. Someone whose approval you worked for. Whose return you waited for. Whose distance made you more attached, not less. For most people, the answer arrives quietly. A parent, an older sibling. A first person who mattered enormously and whose love was real but unreliable. The purpose of this reflection isn't to relive pain. It's to distinguish the past from the present. To recognize that the person you are drawn to now, the one who makes you feel uncertain, is not the same person you were trying to reach then. But your nervous system has not made that distinction yet. It is still running the old program. And you can gently, gradually begin to update it. Visual. Old photograph in someone's hand, then hand setting it down. The fourth step is building your capacity to receive. One of the quieter effects of this pattern is that it trains you to be far more skilled at pursuing than at receiving. You become excellent at the work of connection. The watching, the reaching, the earning. But when someone offers you warmth freely, without you having to earn it, there's a part of you that doesn't know what to do with it, that deflects, that minimizes, that changes the subject. The practice here is small and concrete. When someone gives you a genuine compliment, a moment of care, a clear expression of their appreciation for you, resist the impulse to deflect. Don't say, "Oh, it was nothing." Don't immediately redirect to them. Just receive it. Let a breath happen. Let it land. You don't have to have a perfect response. You just have to stop interrupting the moment with the old reflex. This is a small act, but over time it changes something. It teaches your nervous system that being received doesn't require performance. That you can be valued simply for being present. That warmth doesn't have to be earned before it can be trusted. Visual. Someone reading a letter, soft expression. Light on their face. The fifth step is the one that holds all the others together. It is this. Stop trying to fix the pattern and start building a genuine relationship with your own interior. The people who resolve this most completely are not the ones who white-knuckle their way toward better choices. They are the ones who slowly become interested in their own inner experience. Who develop enough curiosity about what they actually feel, not what they should feel, not what the psychology says they feel, to begin to trust their own read of a situation. This is what therapy actually builds, when it works. Not a set of rules for how to behave in relationships, but a relationship with yourself that is stable enough that you don't need someone else's consistency to feel okay. When your internal ground is solid enough, you become less dependent on the external signal. The uncertainty still exists, but it no longer has the power to destabilize you, because you are not waiting for them to tell you who you are. You already know. Let's bring all of this together. Here is the model that holds everything we've covered. You came into adulthood with a nervous system that learned love from an inconsistent source. It learned that connection requires pursuit, that warmth must be earned, that the relief of return is what love feels like. Your dopamine system reinforced this by treating unpredictability as high value. So you found yourself drawn, again and again, to relationships that recreated this familiar texture. Not because you want to suffer, but because your nervous system is trying to solve an old problem. It is still trying to earn the consistent warmth that wasn't reliably available when you needed it most. And it keeps believing that this particular person, might be the one who finally provides it. They usually aren't, not because they're bad people, but because the problem was never about finding the right person. It was about updating the template. And that happens through practice, not insight alone. Through learning to distinguish anxiety from chemistry. Through tolerating the unfamiliarity of being consistently valued. Through tracing the pattern back to its origin and separating then from now. Through building the capacity to receive. Through gradually becoming someone whose sense of self doesn't depend on an external signal to feel real. Visual, waves moving slowly, light on water at dusk, none of this is fast. None of it is linear. You will understand this completely and still feel the pull toward the person who keeps you uncertain. That's not failure. That's the gap between knowing something and having lived it long enough for the nervous system to believe it. The gap closes slowly. And the way it closes is through every small moment when you choose with full awareness of the pull to act from something steadier than the need to resolve the uncertainty. Not because the uncertainty doesn't affect you, but because you are no longer entirely at its mercy. Visual, empty room with sunlight, a single chair. Nothing else, calm. The person who keeps you uncertain is not the mystery. You are, and the longer you spend trying to decode them, the less time you spend doing the only thing that actually changes the pattern. Learning what it feels like to be fully present in your own life, without waiting for someone else to confirm that you deserve to be there.